up, T-Ticket Potters? Welcome back to the program. I'm your host, Sky Guasco. This is another episode of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast, episode 460. I'm joined by my man, Jay Della, this evening, better known as Jordan Della Valley. You can find us both on Twitter at Sky Guasco and J Della Valley with an E, not a Y, 7, J Della Valley 7. We are going to recap our terrible performances from our Eagles and 49ers, and we will get into all of the other Sunday and Monday night action in our week 3 recap. And then Jordan is going to give you one or two things from each team that he is looking forward to heading into week 4. We hope all of you are doing well, had a great weekend, and are getting into week 4 here at ideally 3-0, 2-1. Even if you're 1-2 or 0-3, it is still early. We have that extra week this year. We're going to turn it around. We are going to help you turn it around. So make sure you stay tuned right here to the Fantasy Focus Facebook page, YouTube. Give us a subscribe and hit that bell. On the Twitch side, we've been blowing up on Twitch lately, so appreciate y'all for joining in. Also on the Twitter side, give us a follow there as well. Fantasy Focused or Fantasy_Focused. And of course, all the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football podcasts can be heard anywhere you listen to the Believe Podcast Network on the podcast side of things. Jordan, man, I know it was a rough Monday night for you. It was a rough Sunday night for me. And I've been trying to think over the last 24 hours, which loss would I prefer? Now, unfortunately, you can't win them all. All right. Even Brady, even Mahomes comes up short. All right. Joe Montana never did, but we're going to stay away from that. You have to lose every once in a while. Okay. Would you rather have the game in the bag with less than 40 seconds left, kick the ball off, play a couple of defensive snaps, make a stop, get out of there, blow it, give up a game-winning field goal, and lose in the last seconds? Or would you rather just get stomped and blown out from the beginning? And if you're listening to Jalen Hurts, you flush it, if you know what I'm talking about. So, Jordan, I welcome you in here. Let's get right into your Eagles. We'll get into my Niners. Let's rip the scabs off quickly here, and we'll move on. Eagles don't look good. I mean, there's no other way to put this here. They came out flat, and this was a big game, man. This is a divisional game. The NFC East is up for grabs. I think still right now the Cowboys clearly look like the best team in the division, but they do every year early. You never know what's going to happen. Last year, Washington football team steals it. The Giants have had good weeks. The Eagles have had good weeks, and the Cowboys have had bad weeks, and you never know about the health there. So how do you feel about your Eagles, man? Like, give me the Eagles fan side of it to start, and then let's do a fantasy breakdown. I'll give you some stats here to warm you up, and then you give me your side of it. We'll start with your Eagles. Jalen Hurts finishes 326, 2 touchdowns, 2 costly picks. Miles Sanders, 5 total touches. We were talking pre-show, horrendous. 5 total touches. Kenny Gainwell, 3 for 33 through the air. Zach Ertz gets the touchdown, but Dallas Goedert, 2 for 66. Jalen Reagor had a big night. Quez Watkins had a big night. Then you had Greg Ward had a big night, caught the touchdown late. On the other side, business as usual for the Cowboys. Just 238 for Dak, but 3 touchdowns. Should have been another one from CeeDee Lamb early. Zeke, 17 for 95 and 2. We love to see that. Tony Pollard involved, but 11 for 60. No touchdown for him. Dalton Schultz, really impressing. 6 for 80 and 2 touchdowns. CeeDee Lamb, 3 for 66, tackled on the 1-yard line early. And Amari Cooper, he's been a dud after a huge opening week. Been a dud the last 2 weeks, just 3 for 26. Eagles get beat up here, 41-21. Are you flushing this one out, or are you really concerned long-term here for your Eagles?
Personally, I'm concerned. I mean, you look at the Eagles' schedule so far. You played seems to be a terrible Atlanta team first. Then we play your 49ers, who are a good team, I think, in my opinion. But again,
you had chances to win that one too, unfortunately.
Should have too. The first half, I think I walked away from the first half going, we're down, but I think we controlled that first half. And
I was nervous that whole game too. I agree. 17-11. I mean, that was a low-scoring game.
Yeah, exactly. And then I think the problem with the Eagles' season outlook is now we go into Dallas, and yes, it's a Monday Night Football game at home. Dallas is hype, I'm sure. First time Dak's playing in Dallas since the injury, but I never felt comfortable at all in that game. From the first Dallas drive, I was like, fuck, here we go. Like, we're getting this is going to be a blowout. And it was. And then you look back at who Dallas has played with their 2-1 or 2-1 record so far. They've played the Chargers, who just beat the Chiefs. They played reigning Super Bowl champs and Tom Brady on opening night. Dallas has had a pretty tough schedule so far. And so looking at just Eagles, as an Eagles fan, you talk about who's going to run away within the NFC East. As long as Dak stays healthy, I don't see anyone but the Cowboys winning this division, to be honest with you. But I agree. To dig a little bit deeper here in this game, I mean, what I need to look for in terms of both the Eagles and Cowboys offense is, I think from Eagles perspective, Hurts looks great in terms of fantasy production. He's always going to have that rushing floor. If they are going to be in games like this where they're getting blown out, like he'll scamper for 5-6 yards here. He'll have a lot of garbage time touchdowns. I mean, again, this is a game where offensive production for the Eagles wasn't great, and Hurts puts up a respectable fantasy quarterback week. I think, again, putting up 20-plus points. Still has yet to dip below that threshold this season. And so moving forward, I'm if I have Hurts, confidently starting him. If I don't have Hurts, potentially trading for him if I want to upgrade at the quarterback position for relatively cheap. He's not a Mahomes or a Brady big name. For the Cowboys, a couple things to look for here is how is the tight end dynamic going to shift, right? So last week, both Jarwin and Schultz, I think, had either 2 or 3 catches each. This week, obviously, Schultz breaks out with the 2 touchdowns. So keeping an eye on that dynamic moving forward. I think both of them, as of right now, could be a potential tight end play. As obviously, you're banking on a breakout like Schultz had, but I think they both have that capability. And similar thing with Pollard's usage. Again, he might be your type of boom or bust type flex play. But yes, he only had the 11 touches for 60 yards. I mean, he's efficient. And if he were to, find the end zone, I mean, you're talking about a 12 to 15 point fantasy week from your flex spot, which even though he's the 1B with Zeke, I mean, they are using him, especially early on in the season when Zeke's, potentially being used as a, trying to manage that workload early in the season.
I made a tweet earlier today that I feel like if the fantasy community would stop thinking about it as Tony Pollard taking over Zeke's job or Tony Pollard being better than Zeke in football terms or fantasy terms, and we just started thinking of another version of Chubb and Hunt in Cleveland, I think we'd feel better about the situation. Like, they're going to use 2 backs. They want Zeke healthy for that 17th season game and the playoffs potentially. They're looking good so far. They could be making a playoff run. They don't want to burn him out early. Do you think that's a fair assessment to think of Zeke and Pollard now as a Chubb and Hunt, where Zeke's the horse, Chubb is the horse? They're the automatic. Mm-hmm. They got to score touchdowns. Zeke obviously a little bit more used in the passing game, but Chubb has an incredible offensive line as well. And then Hunt and Pollard could be complete duds for you, or they could lead the team because of garbage time or late comebacks with the touchdowns and pass catching. So do you think that's a fair assessment? And would you feel better about it if you started thinking of it that way versus, I got to sell Zeke and I got to buy, sell out for Pollard?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way that you want to think about it, especially in a redraft league, is you want to think about it as I want to say like a Chubb Hunt light. You think about other running backs in this situation. At the beginning of the season, we were looking at Dobbins and Gus Edwards. Before we knew his usage, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, of being these type of both fantasy relevant running backs. I think with Dobbins and Edwards, you have a very high rush volume offense. I think Chubb and Hunt in the Browns are a little step down from that. And Zeke and Pollard, obviously, because of Dak and all the receiving threats that Dallas have, are probably another step back behind those two, but doesn't mean that they're not fantasy relevant. And both running backs, like you mentioned, are involved in the pass offense, as opposed to Chubb isn't as involved. J.K. Dobbins was never expected to be involved in the very minimal pass game that the Ravens had, but both Zeke and Chubb are. So I think you have that dynamic as well. So I think it's a good way to look at what is now the running back situation in Dallas.
Yeah, I agree. And again, it could be the modern day version of that thunder and lightning idea that the Giants back in the early 2000s kind of made a staple in the NFL for a while with Tiki Barber, as the lightning, and then, Jacobs, right? being Brandon Jacobs was this massive goal line just grinder at the end of the games and stuff, being that thunder there. So if that's Zeke and Pollard and Chubb and Hunt and Jonathan Taylor, Naheem Hines, that kind of dynamic I think is good in the NFL, and a lot of teams are moving that direction. So we saw what Zeke is capable of. They're going to use him when they need him. I felt a lot better about Zeke now, and Pollard should still absolutely be managed in all formats. All right, man. Gave you your time to sulk in your Eagles. Best of luck next week. Now it's my turn. All right, so Packers, Niners, a lot of talk here about, the NFC Championship games, and the Niners ran all over them, blah, blah, blah. And as a Niner fan last week, I kept telling people on the Sunday night or the Sunday morning show, which everyone should join us for the last minute start sits 3 hours before kickoff. Join us right here on YouTube for start sits. Trey Sermon came up a million times, obviously, right? And I kept saying you can play him because he may be the guy and you want the guy for the Niners. But what if he isn't? What if he's not? You're going to have another dud like Elijah Mitchell. And it was just like, no, there's no way. There's no way. Well, he accidentally gets a touchdown at the end of the game, but it didn't feel good from fantasy, right? And I'm concerned about that. As a 49er fan, I haven't believed in Jimmy Garoppolo in a long time, and I've been on that soapbox for a while. But the offense doesn't feel like it's clicking. Brandon Ayuk still hasn't quite gotten ready to go. We finally used George Kittle, but not to his full extent. That's been frustrating. Our defense is already beat up. The defensive line can compete with anybody. Our linebacking core is great with Warner in the middle there, but our secondary is terrible. We're bringing in anybody off the street at this point. We brought in Josh Norman last week. Dude is like throwing up blood after the game. He's out. We bring in Buster Screen, who was terrible for the Jets. We're picking up anybody we can, basically. And now our boy, Uncle Sherman, is now going to be with Tampa Bay looking for a ring, right? So it's just been frustrating for a 49ers fan because the division we're in. With the Eagles, I think there's one horse. It's the Cowboys right now, right? But if the Eagles play well, they could beat out Washington and New York. The 49ers, every team in that division could win the division. And right now, unfortunately, I feel like the 49ers are the weakest link. Not by much. They're still a great team, but I'm concerned just 3 games in. They lose to the Packers, of course, 38-28. We all know the ending there. Mason Crosby comes in, 50-plus yard field goal to ice it. Rodgers is the man. Gets that monkey off his back versus the Niners and whatnot. We'll see him again in January, hopefully. Devonte Adams, 12 receptions, 132 yards, and a touchdown. Not hurt. Looked like he got completely destroyed and knocked out, concussed, and he was in. I got off the couch to get some water. I came back, and he was back in the game, and I was shocked. I thought the dude was going to be out like weeks. Comes back. Aaron Jones, 96 total yards and the touchdown. George Kittle, 7 catches, 92 yards, and a touch as well. And Brandon Ayuk does get involved with a TD, but again, not as much as I'd like to see. So you said you were nervous about the Niners. I'm not super nervous or about the Eagles. I'm not super nervous about the Niners per se, but I do think they either need to go let Jimmy chuck it or get back to the run game. But we have losing all of our running backs once again. So I just think the identity is lost a little bit with what Shanahan wants to do, what Jimmy's capable of, and what our offense is able to do. Deebo Samuel disappeared in this game, which I'm not surprised. I called that one as well. So hopefully they can run a couple more games here, but a little early to panic for the Niners, but we should have had that game, and I'm disappointed. Not that we lost, but how it went down. And Kyle Juszczyk being our best player on offense is not supposed to happen. Dude's a beast, but he's a fullback, so a little bit concerned there. What are we looking for in week 4 for the Packers and Niners?
Yeah, I mean, for the Packers, I think this was the game that we expected to see from them. I mean, they now seem to be back on pace. Obviously, the week 1 falter, everyone seemed to panic. Rodgers and Adams seem to be clicking now. Aaron Jones had the big week last week. Again, 96 yards this week. I'm not too worried about anyone really on the Packers offense. Maybe Bob Tonyan. He wasn't really involved this week. But again, this is where the Packers offense is so efficient with Rodgers behind under center that they don't really need to include everyone in every week. And this was just a week where they didn't really need Tonyan. But moving forward, obviously would want to see more than one target and see him more involved in this Packers offense. From the 49ers side, I mean, again, Deebo, not really concerned about. He did go missing. Jair Alexander, I don't know how often he was shadow covering. Deebo, in terms of a stat, from how many routes Alexander was on Debo, but did have 10 targets. So not too worried about Debo. Ayuk was a little bit more impressive this week and a little bit more involved. Obviously had the touchdown. So want to continue to monitor that. But the biggest thing for the 49ers is that running back room. Sermon was okay. I mean, from a fantasy perspective, saved your week with a touchdown, but didn't do anything to win the job. So when Elijah Mitchell comes back, when Jeff Wilson comes back, when Trey Sermon's still there, who's going to be this lead guy? Or is it going to be more of a committee? Is it going to be the 49ers of old where you're kind of playing Russian roulette, starting one of them in your lineup? They could go off for 102, but they could also be the guy that gets 4 carries for 22 yards that week.
Would you call that rushing roulette?
Oh, nice.
All right, let's move on here. You and I have both taken our 20 minutes here to cry about our teams. Go Eagles, go Niners. Let's bounce back. And let's move on here, man. We got the whole rest of the Sunday slate. Let's crush these ones out. We're going to dial it all the way back to Sunday morning with the Bears and the Browns. Justin Fields getting his NFL debut. 8 sacks. 8 sacks, unfortunately, for Justin Fields. Looked absolutely horrendous. He will bounce back. He's much better than that. Myles Garrett had 4.5 by himself. Browns get the big win here, 26-6. The Bears have the worst offense of all time and no offensive line, basically. The Bears just haven't looked good, right? They go Andy Dalton. Nick Foles is on the bench, and he's a distant third. Shouldn't even be rostered, in my opinion, whatever. But Matt Nagy comes out after the game and throws the kid under the bus immediately. Like, I know he had a terrible game. It was obviously horrendous. You immediately say, okay, well, now we're going to go back to Andy Dalton if he's healthy. And if not, we're going to go with Nick Foles just because we paid him a bunch of money and we're obligated to do it. Terrible move, dude. I'm hating this situation for the Bears and Justin Fields. It feels like Tua last year, which was terrible. And Tua basically said after the season, like, didn't learn the playbook, couldn't really get any flow. If that's an issue for Justin Fields early, it's going to really hurt him, I think, long-term. And Kareem Hunt, over 150 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. Odell Beckham, 9 targets in his return. Nick Chubb didn't get a touchdown, right? But he still had over 80-plus yards. Again, he's not touchdown reliant, but because Hunt has all that, extra work there, that's kind of that, thunder and lightning there. So Nick Chubb is just fine. Baker's okay. Jarvis Landry's still out here. So what are we looking forward to in week 4 for both the Browns and the Bears?
I'm looking forward to Nick Foles, Super Bowl MVP coming back and starting
Absolutely again. Not. God,
dude. To be honest, like, what to watch for is how bad this Bears offense is going to be.
Is it actually bad? I think that's the question.
That's the question. Is like, I was
so much talent. What the hell's going on?
I was just flipping back through like their old stats. I was like, is their offensive line really this bad? Like, I totally get that you're playing Myles Garrett. Dude had a career day, like had a whole season essentially in a week. And, was it just Myles Garrett was on and destroying that, side of the line? Maybe. But they faced Aaron Donald and the Rams in week 1 and didn't give up 8 sacks. Like, I don't know if it was a Justin Fields thing, if he was holding on to the ball too long, trying to make, extend these plays as a rookie QB instead of just getting rid of it, checking down. But for the most part, like, it didn't look good for the Bears. And so I'm kind of concerned about almost anyone on the Bears. I'm not really concerned about David Montgomery just because of the opportunity and volume that he's going to get. But, Darnell Mooney was a breakout candidate this year. Allen Robinson was almost always a top 12, if not top 24 fantasy wide receiver. And, you've noticed that, especially without touchdowns, like, that production's not going to be what it was of years past. And so until obviously, like, we are in week 3, we have time to get this, offense back to where it was. But if we are starting Nick Foles and Andy Dalton, are those really quarterbacks that you have ever been able to rely on for any of the last 5 years for fantasy production from the wide receiver position?
Yeah, you don't want that. I mentioned on yesterday's podcast, if you haven't heard it yet, TCK Potters, you can dial back. I went through the waiver and everything else. If you have waivers coming up tonight, you can get a last minute listen to the waiver column. I also gave some players on the hot seat, some players I'm kind of panicking about or patient with, and also a couple trade targets. I mentioned I'm trading for Saquon Barkley. I'm not going to break that down right now, but I did mention that I'm looking to acquire Saquon, and I'm looking to trade away Allen Robinson, a player that I loved coming in. Wide receiver 63 right now, Jordan. 63 yep. On the season in PPR, 6 targets in week 1, or excuse me, 11 targets in week 1, 6 catches. 4 targets and 2 catches in week 2, 6 targets, 2 catches again last week.
Yeah, that's what you really hate. Like you see that week 1 target and you're okay, right? Like you see the 11 targets, you're like, oh, if I'm going to get 11 targets, okay, I got 6 catches. Like it'll come with the targets, right? But then you almost drop off a cliff immediately in week 2, and then again in week 3.
Bro, here's the issue: 35 yards in week 1. Okay, that's against the Rams. All right, it's against the Rams. He got the targets, 35 yards, whatever. Outlier. Against the Bengals, 24 yards. He caught a touchdown, dropped another one. Last week, 27 yards for Allen Robinson. He's not going to get you a ton of yardage, but he's a volume guy, and he's just not getting it right now. I'm definitely concerned there. All right, I'm getting frustrated about my Bears because I was actually fired up about the Bears, and now they're letting me down, unfortunately. Let's move on here. Washington football team and the Buffalo football Bills. Yo, man, this one's surprising. The Washington football team, I picked to win this division. Obviously looking terrible because the Cowboys are good and Dak is back and all is good for Dallas currently. But I thought Washington was the truth, even with Taylor Heineke coming in with that defense. That defense has not been that defense yet. 43 points led up to Josh Allen and the Bills. 5 touchdowns for Josh Allen, 358 yards. Cole Beasley, 11 receptions, 98 yards. Emmanuel Sanders has 2 touchdowns. Stephon Diggs, still not Stephon Diggs yet. He's a buy low candidate for me personally. He's not going to be cheap, but he's somebody you might be able to look for here. But Washington football team, man, is concerning. And Trey White is a problem. I was worried about Terry McLaurin. He got his numbers eventually, but Trey White's the truth. And I'm concerned about this overall offense. And, Antonio Gibson ripped off a big run, and he can do that anytime. But overall, I'm a little bit concerned, and that defense is not as terrifying as I thought it was. So you can play your studs against this defense here. But the Bills, a big win, 43-21.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that Stephon Diggs is buy low candidate for you. He is for me. He's not going to be as buy low as maybe Saquon, who's coming off of the ACL injury, but Diggs obviously does have that name. He's coming off of that wide receiver 1 season, or 2 actually after Devonte. But so it's not going to be completely low. But if you think about all the receiving options that are there in Buffalo, I mean, both Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders are actually viable flex plays in most fantasy formats, right? You have in PPR, Beasley's always going to be that Hunter Renfrow-esque type, Wes Welker, whatever you want to call him, where is just going to get a ton of targets from Josh Allen. Emmanuel Sanders is almost the opposite, where he's not going to get a ton of volume, but he's getting a lot of the deep targets in this offense right now. So if you want to play Emmanuel Sanders on the prayer that he gets one of those long touchdowns, like it's a viable opportunity for sure any given week with this Buffalo offense. Looking forward with the Washington football team. I mean, next week they play Atlanta, and so I think you're going to have a lot of production there. But really what you need to see if you're the Antonio Gibson owner is a lot more involvement in the passing offense, right? You mentioned he had the 70-plus yard receiving touchdown this week and then had 1 target after that. Like, this guy was a wide receiver in college. Like, we all mention it in the fantasy community, but Ron Rivera just seems to doubt his passing ability and just does not want to involve him, or catching ability, and does not want to involve him in this pass offense. I don't know why, but if you want the value of your Antonio Gibson back of the first, early second, maybe mid-second round pick, you were banking on a lot more involvement from this, in the passing offense.
Which is so frustrating too, because I mean, nobody's Christian McCaffrey, and I don't think anybody took it seriously. But when Ron Rivera coached Christian McCaffrey in Carolina, and then he drafts Antonio Gibson and basically says, we want this kid to be our Christian McCaffrey because he's a wide receiver playing running back, and they just don't use him. Now, look, no shade on J.D. McKissick. He bounced around the NFL for a couple of years, and he landed in Washington. Last year, he did pretty well with led the NFL in targets and receptions from the running back position with Alex Smith. He's a good receiver also. So he is the pass catching back, but Antonio Gibson can also do it. And we say it all the time in the fantasy community, but obviously these NFL coaches don't give a shit about fantasy. But for us, we just look at like, start your studs, like give the best player on your team all of the work. Why not do that? Obviously these guys get paid to make decisions not to do it for whatever reason. It's frustrating for us, but you have to imagine that these guys are professional professionals at what they do, and they're making the decision not to. So very frustrating, but that's how it goes sometimes. Let's move on here to one of the most thrilling endings to a game, which should not have been. The Ravens should have beat the Lions by 3 touchdowns. They did not. And the Lions are not winning games because it's the Lions and they don't win games. However, I don't think I can remember, Jordan, a Lions team, except for maybe 1 or 2 when Calvin Johnson was at his peak, all the way back to the Barry Sanders days when they still weren't very competitive, when the Lions team on offense and defense was at least competitive, trying hard, playing well, and they're getting beat, but they're actually like, they're entertaining to watch. They're scoring points, albeit a lot of it in junk time, but it doesn't matter. I mean, they're competing in games. They're not getting blown out like Lions usually do. And I think there might be something up in this Dan Campbell attitude of this team, which I respect and appreciate so far. Ravens do get the win on a Justin Tucker NFL record 66-yard field goal. I had Jay Tuck behind me last week. I've got his jersey, and it's the missus' favorite player. So we were watching it on Red Zone, and I was like, yo, babe, this one's coming up. It's an NFL record if he makes it, and your team would win. She's like, oh, it's too far, blah, blah, blah. Kicks it, hits the crossbar, doink, bounces up and over, and makes it, and it's just absolutely phenomenal. So Justin Tucker's the man. Also, I have to mention this every time, sings opera in 8 languages. Shouts out to my man, Justin Tucker. 1917, Ravens get the big win over the Lions. DeAndre Swift, 107 total yards and a touchdown. And just because my boy Jamal Williams also had a touchdown, Mark Andrews finally showed up, 5 catches, 109. He'll get his touchdowns eventually. Hollywood Brown, 3 crucial drops, like 20, 30-yard pass plays each time drops. Let's hope that is not a long-term situation. Rashad Bateman is eligible this week to come off IR. I don't know if he'll be that much of a factor now, but he is going to be a factor. Sammy Watkins still out there. I think Hollywood Brown, who's been playing well, needs to shake that off next week, or he could be put down the line a little bit there. But big win from the Ravens, but a little too close to comfort.
Yeah, I mean, this Lions team is shocking how close they're making these games, especially against the teams that they've played against. A lot of the points they put up in San Francisco were in garbage time.
But they almost won that one too, dude. I was sweating.
I know.
I was like, what the hell are we doing pulling our defense? And
Green Bay in the first half was competitive.
They were leading at half.
Yep. And then this week it turned out to be extremely close, obviously, as you can tell by the final score. But I do think you hit the nail on the head with, like, Hollywood Brown had a couple drops here that probably make this game a little bit not as close, or at least not feeling as close. So looking ahead for this Detroit Lions team, DeAndre Swift and Jamal Williams, I wish it was Jamal Charles, have both been very productive in terms of fantasy so far, very viable starts. And this week coming up, now play the Bears in week 4. Looking at who the Bears, what they just did against the Browns. I mean, Nick Chubb, 22 for 84, Kareem Hunt, 10 for 81 on the ground and a touchdown, 6 catches for 74 through the air. I would not be worried about either one of these. Obviously, I'd prefer to have DeAndre Swift here, but I think a lot of times you think about the Chicago Bears defense and being a solid defense. If their offense can't keep their defense off the field, there's going to be plenty of opportunity, especially for these Lions running backs. A lot of their offense is funneled through them and TJ Hawkinson. So if they're going to be on the field, those are going to be the guys that are likely getting the fantasy points.
And Hawk was a no-show in this game as well. So, you know what? I mean, I might be picking, Chris Benavides jumps on our last show of the week, and he and I do the previews of the next week's game and the TCK pod preview as well. So we'll be doing that again on Friday. Last week, I picked the Bengals to beat the Steelers. I picked the Chargers to beat the Chiefs. And I've got a handful of other upsets, man. And right now, you just have to kind of ride the hot hand. And look, the Lions, which is ridiculous to say, the Lions, I think, are a better overall squad right now than the Bears.
If you just break that down from a talent perspective, what you just said sounds ridiculous. Like, I know, but I agree. But I agree with you as a product of what is rolled out there on the field on game day. I don't hate what you just said.
But the Lions just lost to 3 playoff teams by a touchdown.
Yep.
You know, and Justin Fields will be good for a long time eventually. But even with Andy Dalton and this offense who had their quarterback all offseason coming in before he got injured, they played pretty well against the Rams, but got run out, right? And then they tried to come back and they got beat up by the Bengals, right? Who are turning out not to be a terrible franchise this year either. So we'll see what happens. But honestly, right now I'm taking the Lions over the Bears. All right, let's move on here. Colts and Titans, another divisional game here. The Titans get the win 25-16. A.J. Brown hurt in this game. He's been a dud already for fantasy, which has been a real bummer. Julio Jones has been up and down, but A.J. Brown has not done anything yet. Now he's hurt. Looks to be out at least 3 weeks, maybe going to, be out longer than that. Hold A.J. Brown for now. You're not going to be able to trade him. I wouldn't trade for him because we haven't seen anything when he was healthy. You just got to kind of hold and wait and put him on your IR for now. Derrick Henry, 28 carries, 113 yards. Look, again, if you're getting 30 touches, eventually he's going to get you 100 yards. And honestly, this Colts offense is just not looking good. Carson Wentz came back with basically 2 broken feet, pretty much. Looked bad. When Carson Wentz is not mobile, you're not worried about him scrambling and doing what he does with the pass game. So why not attack the run? JT, unfortunately, wasn't able to get it done. Quentin Nelson gets hurt in this game as well. Naheem Hines has a nice game, but he's not the one people are playing in fantasy. I'm once again worried about the Colts. I think the Titans will be just fine, other than, of course, A.J. Brown.
Yep, exactly. I mean, the Titans are going to be fine. Julio gets a little bit of a boost now with A.J. Brown being out. You're not really worried about targets going to A.J. Brown over Julio. Derrick Henry, you never really worried about, especially since the second half of that Seahawks game. I mean, he's obviously going to get all the volume there. I think it's pretty much status quo for the Titans offense. Looking at the Colts offense, though, I mean, now you just have a lot of questions of who can you really start? I mean, if Wentz is out, if Wentz is not 100%, this offense isn't really great, to be honest with you. I mean, we talked about earlier a couple weeks ago how the offense looked like it was going through JT and Nyheim Hines. Michael Pittman had the breakout in week 2 with 120 plus yards. There's not really much coming from the tight ends. Zach Pascal seems to have faded off since his 2 touchdown performance. I mean, I don't even think JT's a buy low candidate for me. He hasn't been doing well, and I don't think I want to buy in now when Carson Wentz is hurt, Quentin Nelson's hurt. Just all around doesn't seem to be a good situation for the Colts offense.
I agree. And again, I don't think there's any pass catchers. I know, Michael Pittman had a nice week last week. Pascal had a couple touchdowns. This is just an offense I'm looking to stay away from. I don't think you can bench Jonathan Taylor because he gets the work. He could break a big run. They should use him in the goal line, but Nyheim Hines is kind of that vulture, right? We're talking about the Chubb and Hunt and Zeke and Pollard. A lower, a tier down from those guys is JT and Nyheim Hines. Now, some news that came up this week that we'll be developing, obviously, and we'll fill you in as it goes along, but Marlon Mack, who has actually been back healthy and looks good, he's just not getting any work because JT is JT and Hines is the pass catcher. He's actually requested a trade, and the Colts have honored that, so he is going to seek a trade. He will most likely not be on the Colts much longer. That gives me a little more hope that there's one less mouth to feed, although he hasn't been terribly active. But keep an eye on these Colts. If anything, I would go try to get Julio on the cheap right now off a bum game and just know that Julio's Julio, man. Left this game with tightness, and we'll see what happens with him. But he is the horse out there without A.J. Brown. Yeah,
and that Marlon Mack take, I mean, I think it says more about Marlon Mack and potentially getting him for extremely cheap. He's probably on your waiver wire, free agency. Stashing him if you have, the availability to cut, some Greg Ward, Quez Watkins, like just cut those guys. I don't know why I just named only Eagles. Probably because we suck. But I think it says more about Marlon Mack and his potential stashability rather than his effect on JT and Hines.
I agree. All right, let's move on to another one. This one was exciting here. My Chargers got my boy Herbie right behind me from the Jersey Jungle. I'm going to give them a shout out here just in a second after this game. Justin Herbert shows up in a big way. Chris and I previewed these games. I picked the Chargers outright to win this game last Friday. Sure enough, they show up and do it. Herbert had his NFL debut last year in week 2 after Tyrod Gate. Should have beat the Chiefs in that game. Mahomes came back with magic, beat them late. The Chargers got him late in the season. So far, Herbert 2, Mahomes 1. Just throwing that out there. Big win here for the Chargers, obviously, 30-24. The Chiefs have trailed by double digits in every game this season. That is a concern. I don't care who's on the team. I don't care who's coaching the team. Mahomes, Andy Reid, Kelsey, Tyreek Hill, the whole thing. That is a concern. I know Mahomes is incredible. I know this offense can put up 50.5. The problem is when they start playing elite defenses come playoff time late in the season or whatever, it's going to be tough. I'm 1-2 Chiefs team is the best 1-2 team you can ever be. But I am concerned as a Chiefs fan, not that we're going to bomb the season, not make the playoffs, whatever. They'll turn it around. But I don't feel like they feel like the Chiefs right now, so I'm worried about that. Justin Herbert, 281, 4 touchdowns from my boy Herbie. Mike Williams, I'm telling you guys, I gave my tribute to Mike Tagliere this week. If you haven't heard it yet, I spent about 25 minutes on a solo podcast earlier this week, a tribute to Mike Tagliere, who passed away this last weekend. Came on the show, episode 400 back in June. And he and I talked about players that he was all in on this year and players he was fading. One of the players he was fading was Jonathan Taylor. We go into that. I faded him, didn't draft him anywhere. So far, that's worked out. A player that he was all in on was Mike Williams. I made him my breakout candidate in the AFC West series. So far, so good. 7 catches in this one, 122, another 2 touchdowns. If not for Cooper Kupp setting the league on fire so far, Mike Williams would be the number 1 fantasy receiver. Cooper Kupp and Mike Williams are those guys right now. So if you drafted them in the 5th and the 7th round, you're laughing all the way to the bank. They're this year's Stephon Diggs from last year. All right, then you have Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce. Tyreek Hill 2 weeks in a row basically being taken out. He's going to get his targets. He could catch a deep bomb at any time, but the Ravens do a soft shell over the top. The Chargers, great secondary, do the same thing. Watch out when the Chiefs play the Broncos. The Broncos have a great secondary as well. I would not be surprised if the Broncos take Tyreek out of this game, focus on Travis Kelce over the middle, shut down the run. They could be in trouble if Teddy can score some points. Just throwing that out there. Mahomes, 2 interceptions, not himself. CEH bounces back, gets a touchdown. You can hang on to him for a while. Austin Eckler gets in. Keenan Allen quietly dominating also, kind of overshadowed, oddly enough, by Mike Williams right now. But Chargers look good, man. This is a huge statement game for them in the AFC West. Chiefs will be the Chiefs eventually, but 1-2 is not how anybody expected them to start.
No, absolutely not. And Tyreek's the one I want to highlight here as what to watch for moving forward. I mean, this wasn't a game where the Chiefs dominated from the start. They did involve CEH a lot in their offense this week, but it's not like he got the quote-unquote game scripted out. I mean, we've never really seen Tyreek Hill get game scripted out from this Chiefs offense anyway. But if you told me these last 2 weeks that the Chiefs were up by 28 early, I'd understand a 5 for 57 week from Tyreek, right? Where you just didn't really need the deep threats, didn't need the passing attack to be at the level that we've seen it from the Chiefs. But that's not the case. It wasn't the case this week either. The Chiefs were, behind early and behind often in a competitive game with the Chargers, and Tyreek was just taken out, like you mentioned, from the defense. And so if defenses are going to continue to scheme out Tyreek Hill and take that option away from Mahomes, I mean, Mahomes is such a good quarterback that he's going to be able to adjust. He'll use Kelsey, he'll use Hardman, Robinson, Pringle, or Andy Reid will use CEH. So it's a little bit concerning, but I don't think it's something to sell Tyreek low here at all. Moving to the Chargers, I mean, we talked about it on the start sit on Sunday. A lot of questions coming in were Mike Williams or, and I remember one specifically was, I'm already starting Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, and I forget who the second option was. And what I said was, you can't sit Mike Williams just because you're starting Keenan Allen. I totally understand that they both can't score on the same play outside of some trick play. I'd love to see Keenan Allen throw a ball one of these days. No idea if he can actually throw. But they're not going to score on the same play. But the problem is this is the week that you're going to get from both of them almost every week. Like, one of them's going to score a touchdown. They're either going to split them, so one's going to get 2. And you don't know. And if you're going to bench Mike Williams just because you have Keenan Allen starting already, you're going to miss out on these big Mike Williams weeks. So moving forward, I mean, I think I'm very willing to start both in the same lineup.
Absolutely. Last year, I mentioned it a couple of times. I paid up for the most expensive handcuff in fantasy football, Kareem Hunt to Nick Chubb. Last year, I drafted Hub, and what would it be? Chunta, I guess. Chubb and Hunt. I drafted both of those guys in 3 different leagues. And Chubb went down, Kareem Hunt took over, whatever. On a week-to-week basis, both of those guys were running back 2s, and then one of them would blow up to be an RB1. If you stop thinking in your head of I can't play both, whatever, think of them as just like, what do they give you production-wise? Keenan Allen and Mike Williams are both wide receiver 1s almost every single week. You want 2 wide receiver 1s on your team. Doesn't matter if they're from the same team, right? Nope. A lot of people wouldn't have a problem going CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper right now, or Godwin and Evans or whatever if you have those kind of stacks. Why not do it if you have both of them? So I do have Keenan Allen and Mike Williams in one league. I start them together every single week, and they're blowing up, so don't worry about that. All right, we're going to take a quick pause. Jordan, I'm going to let you get a quick water break. Also, I'm going to give a shout-out. I see the chat room starting to blow up here with some questions. We will get to those questions, but not until the end of the episode. We still have about 6 games to recap here. So if you're looking for an urgent answer, you'll have to come back. Otherwise, stick around for us. Also, please, a reminder, we do this every single Sunday. Make sure to come check us out for the Sunday Start Sit live stream, 3 hours before kickoff. That's 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time and 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. for us West Coasters. Bobby, myself, and Jordan are West Coasters up at the crack of dawn, 7 a.m. Got 3 hours of Start Sit live streaming for you right here on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe and hit the bell on Fantasy Focused YouTube page and get that alert when we jump on Sunday morning. We go Start Sit for 3 hours. We prefer that you come to us then versus during an episode because we have so much other content to cover. Sometimes you catch us in a good mood and we'll get to some. So I see some of you in the chat room. Hang tight with me, please. I've got a lot of other things to cover, but I will get to these here. Jordan and I will cover you. I know we have some trade conversations. We have some start sits. How do we feel about certain players? Jordan and I will cover those guys at the end of the episode. Hang tight for us, please. All right, before we continue on, I want to give a shout out to our friends at the Jersey Jungle. Again, if you're looking at the YouTube here, you can see Devonte Adams, my boy behind me. Also, my man, Justin Herbert. I went to the Duck game this last weekend. It was a squeaker. We were supposed to beat Arizona by 28 points, according to the spread. It was tight, but we got the W in the Pac-12, a conference game. I love that. Great atmosphere. My first game back since the pandemic kicked off. It was absolutely fantastic. We had a great time. So got to cheer on my Ducks. And, of course, Justin Herbert got the jersey behind me here. Hit up the Jersey Jungle on Instagram. That's where they handle their business. That's the Jersey Jungle. Use the promo code TCK to receive 10% off of 1 or 2 jerseys, 15% off of 3 jerseys with the promo code TCK. And again, folks, you're already starting at 50%. You go to NFL.com, MLB, NBA, NHL.com. You're paying $150, $200 for hockey jerseys because they have the longer sleeves and stuff. You go to the Jersey Jungle, you're already paying half. These are not knockoffs. These are not from overseas. These are the real deal. They're authentic jerseys. I got them behind me. Hit up my boy Trenton. Use the promo code TCK and get 10% off of 1 or 2, 50% off of 3 jerseys. Again, the Jersey Jungle on Instagram. All right, Jordan, let's get into the rest of this here. Now we're going to kick it off with the Saints and the Patriots. Saints get the win here, 28-13. Alvin Kamara, 118 total yards and a touchdown. We do have a question in the thread that I'm going to get to specifically here regarding Alvin Kamara. We'll get to that in just a second. Alvin Kamara, 118 total yards and a touchdown. Kendrick Bourne and Jacoby Myers over 90 yards each. I don't want either one of these tight ends at this point. James White, my man, goes down with a similar hip injury to Ryan Fitzpatrick, which put him on the IR. I'm concerned about James White long-term for the rest of the season in redraft leagues. You could put him on IR if you want. You may just end up dropping him. Unfortunately, the question is it Ramondre Stevenson, who blew up training camp or preseason, or is it going to be J.J. Taylor, who is kind of like the other James White on that squad? And Mac Jones is a deep kind of super flex at this point. And then for the Saints, look, man, I mean, Jameis did enough to get it done, but they run the offense through Alvin Kamara finally and does wonders here. They get 4 touchdowns out of that in the offense. So looking good for the Saints. Patriots have a big game against Brady and the Bucs obviously coming up, so that's no good this next weekend here. But the Saints do business here with a big win, 28-13. I'll get your feedback, Jordan, and then we'll go to our question.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty status quo here for these teams. Obviously, the James White injury is unfortunate. You're starting. I mean, I at least was starting to get to the point where, as a flex or potentially an RB2, if you are light at RB in a PPR format, you could start White. I mean, he was starting to be an integral part of this offense. With him going down, looking forward to, hey, is it Ramondre Stevenson? Is it JJ Taylor? I mean, neither of them are really the James White per se, like in terms of level of talent at this point in their careers. I'd expect it to be JJ Taylor more than Ramondre Stevenson, but I'm not interested in adding either of them to my team unless they prove something in these next couple of weeks. I think it hurts Mac Jones a little bit too, because he was almost a safety valve, was James White. And so we'll see what happens with the Patriots offense, but especially next week against the Bucs defense, not something that I'm turning towards from a fantasy perspective. For the Saints, I know we have the question here in the chat that we'll get to, but things are finally looking good for this offense. It's going to be interesting to see when Michael Thomas comes back, how that affects Alvin Kamara. I mean, a lot of people think that could be like targets away from Kamara. You know, when Michael Thomas went down, a lot more targets to Kamara, but I don't think that's the case. I think it just opens the defense more for Kamara and the Saints offense.
Let's get to this question here. Come here now, Beach. It's our homie from the regular here from Twitch. Are you concerned about Kamara's fantasy value, Jordan? Let me break this down for you here. Week 1 against Green Bay, 73% snap share, 20 carries, 83 yards, 3 catches, gets a receiving touchdown. At Carolina, week 2, just 5 fantasy points, 8 carries for 5 yards, 4 catches on 6 targets. And then last week versus New England, 19.3 half PPR fantasy points, 84% of the snap share, 24 carries, 89 yards, 3 catches, and a touchdown. Simply put, for me, no, I'm not concerned. This is not Drew Brees' offense. You have to realize that. You had to know that drafting Alvin Kamara. I had him and still am confident that he was my number 3 running back heading into the season. Has he been the number 3 running back? No, he hasn't. Over the season, will he be? He might be. We'll see what happens. He's got the Giants coming up next, and then at Washington, and then they have a bye. After the bye, at Seattle, Tampa Bay's tough, but then they have Atlanta, Tennessee, Philadelphia, and they're going to have to run through the air against Buffalo and Dallas. So as this offense continues to click, again, think about this. This is 3 weeks here in a new season with no Drew Brees, right? I know Jameis Winston filled in and Taysom Hill filled in for Drew Brees, but it's their ship now. It's different, and they're going to continue to run through the Saints. So I'm not concerned. I would buy low if I could on Alvin Kamara in a half or a full PPR league. Jordan, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, pretty much the same. I mean, honestly, I'd buy in a standard league as well. I mean, I know Kamara is one of the running backs that gets a boost in a half or a full PPR. But just because of the opportunities and the involvement that he has in that Saints offense, like that's something that I'd want to buy in. And no more Latavius Murray behind either. It's now Jones Jr., so not worried at all about Kamara.
Let's bring up this then. You mentioned a standard league as well. We got another question here regarding a trade. JT86TN, what do you think about this trade? I would give CMC and Cooper. I'm going to assume that's Amari Cooper, not Cooper Kupp. I would give CMC and Cooper for Alvin Kamara and CeeDee Lamb. It's a standard scoring league. Give CMC, who's obviously out the next couple of weeks, and Amari Cooper, who's clearly hurt or just not effective right now. Get Alvin Kamara and CeeDee Lamb.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think this really depends on your team situation. I, in a bottle, would lean towards keeping CMC and Amari Cooper. I know both are dealing with their own injuries now. But if you're maybe an 0-3 team and maybe your playoffs start a little bit sooner, you need some wins now. You can't wait for CMC to come back. You don't know how long he's going to be out. Is it going to be 2 weeks? Is it going to be 4? If you need wins now, I'd be okay taking what I think is season long, probably a little bit lower of a value, but helps me win these weeks where I need to start clawing back in and can't afford to go 0-5 in my fantasy league.
Preseason, I had CeeDee Lamb over Amari Cooper anyway. CMC is CMC, but he's out at least 2 weeks, and it might be recurring. Remember, last year he got hurt. He was out a couple weeks, came back, 30 points, got hurt, was out, came back, 30 points, was out, and he was hurt. So
it was the same week he went out last year too, week 3.
Exactly. You can't count on him being 100% even when he comes back. Alvin Kamara right now is that offense. I like CeeDee Lamb over Amari Cooper currently. And I think moving forward, I had predicted CeeDee Lamb become that number one here this week or this year. And Bobby and I kind of, went at it all summer over this. And we will see what happens by the end of the year. But I would take this trade even in standard, Kamara and CeeDee Lamb. Okay, let's get back to our games here. And we can speed these up a little bit here. Falcons and Giants. Falcons get the win here. Younghoe Koo, my man. Last second, time expires, gets that field goal to put the Falcons over the top here. Both these teams come in 0-2. Falcons get the win. 17-14. Falcons get the dub. Saquon looked good. 94 total yards and a touchdown. Patterson, I think Patterson, who's a kick returner, is the RB1 in Atlanta. I'd mentioned that last week. Calvin Ridley has not yet broken 100 yards. Still getting the targets. I think Calvin Ridley is either a buy low if you have studs otherwise and you don't need him to be your wide receiver one. I think he's a sell name value if you need wins because he might click eventually, but he's not yet. I'm dealing with the situation personally. I'm looking to move off of Calvin Ridley. I don't know if I'd go as steep as like Calvin Ridley for Mike Williams right now, but that is a conversation I'm willing to have with myself, a Keenan Allen, somebody else who's performing well, maybe Stephon Diggs. See how you feel about that. Kyle Pitts, again, yet to really break out, but it's just a matter of time for him. On the Giants side, look, Daniel Jones, if he doesn't run the ball, he's not going to be as great. But Saquon did look pretty good here. So how do you feel about the Giants and the Falcons, both struggling offenses?
Yeah, both struggling offenses and surprisingly a low-scoring game for what, given the defenses that both of these teams have, was shocked that neither offense really moved the ball more than they did. But Saquon moving forward, I think last week was or before this game against the Falcons was pretty much your buy low opportunity. I'd be impressed if you could now move Saquon off of a team. If you could still buy him, I would. I just unfortunately think that window's passed. He's clearly been more involved in the offense. He'll continue to be more involved as he continues to come back from that ACL. On the Atlanta side of the ball, Cordell Patterson seems to be the most involved. Pitts looks like he's not as involved. If you did pay up for him in that 5th round, you're severely disappointed. If you're in any type of keeper league, I don't think you're going to be able to move or get Pitts in a dynasty. I think a lot of people are going to be holding on to Pitts in dynasty, but if you're in a keeper league where, depending on your rule settings, you might be only able to keep players for 1 or 2 years, you might be able to get Pitts at a pretty significant discount right now, especially if that team is looking more to win this year rather than next or the following.
Not a bad option. Again, rookie tight ends. Doesn't matter who you are. It takes a while. It's just a matter of time. I think he will blow up eventually, but it could be second half. It could be next season. We'll see what happens. Stay patient with Pitts. All right, next up, Bungles get the huge win here over the Steelers. 24-10. Big Ben looked absolutely horrendous. Juju got hurt in this game. Deontay Johnson was out. Najee Harris, 144 yards. He had 12 catches on 19 targets, Jordan. Second most in NFL history, the most since 2018 when Alvin Kamara had 20. 19 targets for Najee Harris. Juju got hurt, couldn't throw short to anybody else. That was obviously Najee Harris. Big Ben looks terrible. Chase Claypool, 9 catches, 96 yards. Jamar Chase on the other side, 4 catches, 65 yards, but 2 touchdowns. T. Higgy out in this game. Tyler Boyd had a nice game as well, but Jamar Chase quickly ascending to a 1B minimum when T. Higgins is healthy. I think he's still the one, but maybe not for long here. Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, we saw it happening at LSU. It's starting to click here in the NFL, looking real good here. Bengals, very impressive win over the Steelers.
Yeah, my one biggest thing to look for moving forward to here is Jamar Chase, right? On the year, 11 catches, 220 yards, 4 touchdowns. Those 4 touchdowns is really what is holding up his, I'll call him a stud, fantasy season so far. Obviously, if we take out those 4 touchdowns, even if we continue to give him the receptions and the yardage, we're looking at 11 PPR fantasy points per game. Not terrible, but obviously is not what you drafted him to be. That's maybe a flex, right? But the point of what we want to look for moving forward is he just that type of guy, right? Like he could just be that deep threat that as long as it's a reliable deep threat and those plays are schemed into the Bengals offensive plan week in and week out, that's something that you can rely on. Yes, there's going to be weeks where you don't have the touchdowns, but you're still going to at least have the depth of target, the long long targets to chase that'll hold up your fantasy weeks, even without missing those long bomb touchdowns.
Last year, they wanted it to be AJ Green. He just wasn't very effective, so it definitely could be Jamar Chase. Chase and Boyd, for me, are flex plays weekly, and when T. Higgins is healthy, he is a wide receiver 2 on the weekend. But all 3 of those guys, I think, can be started weekly when healthy. Joe Burrow's playing well. All right, Cardinals and Jags. Cardinals get the win here. No big surprise, 31-19. It was kind of surprising that Kyler Murray didn't absolutely dominate this game. He had a couple costly, weird picks, but Kyler's going to be just fine. AJ Green, Christian Kirk, both over 100 yards. Nuke Hopkins, man, questionable all week, didn't practice. I said he was fine. Comes out, he's kind of laid an egg the last couple of weeks. His targets have gone down the last couple of weeks. It's tough to sit a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, but they have so many other options in Arizona. You could move off of him if you can, or sit him for a week and see what happens. You can sit Robert Woods. You can sit Allen Robinson at this point, right? Like, you got to play it weekly, and DeAndre Hopkins is not himself right now. James Conner, 2 touchdowns on the goal line. James Robinson, 15 carries, 88 yards, and a touchdown as well. Kyler Murray is going to be just fine. Rondale Moore kind of lays an egg for us, but again, we knew he was kind of boom or bust with the snap share percentage. How do you feel about the Cardinals and Jags?
Yeah, I think moving forward with the Cardinals wide receivers, I mean, that is essentially the question of, can we continue to trust DeAndre Hopkins like we have in years past? Or is this Cardinals offense going to start to be one that is, well, two of these 3 or 4 wide receivers every week are going to go off? Is it going to be Christian Kirk and AJ Green, or is it going to be Rondale Moore and DeAndre Hopkins? Is it going to be Hopkins and Kirk? I think I wouldn't be personally moving off of Hopkins. I mean, I'd continue to keep him. I think he is the alpha wide receiver there. I think when he is fully healthy, this simply could have been a week of Cliff Kingsbury saying, we want you out there. If you're healthy enough, we'll get you involved. But for the most part, you're going to open up the defense for AJ Green and Christian Kirk. Very possible. I mean, it's something that as long as there's no immediate threat to DeAndre Hopkins and his health, it's something that I would do too. So as we continue to monitor DeAndre Hopkins' health, I'm sure he'll continue to be that alpha there in Arizona. The question is, who's going to start to be that, if anyone, consistent number 2?
Let's move on here to the Jets and the Broncos. Jets look absolutely pathetic, unfortunately. I had a lot of high hopes from my boys, Robert Saleh and LaFleur coming over from the Niners. I think they get it right eventually, but so far, no dice. We had a question earlier in the comments I just answered on my own that was, which team is worse, the Jags or the Jets? And I had to think about it for a minute, but the Jets right now as an overall squad and talent, I think, are worse than the Jags. Neither team has won yet. Broncos, impressive on offense, impressive on defense, though. They're the real deal, undefeated on the season. Melvin Gordon, majority of the carries, 18 for 61, gets that touchdown. Tim Patrick, 5 catches, 98 yards. KJ Hamler, a big pickup for Bobby and I a couple weeks ago, out with a torn ACL. He's done for the season. Not much to talk about on the Jets side of the ball here. You could still flex out Corey Davis, hoping for the best, but I don't want any part of that run game. Zach Wilson is unplayable right now. And honestly, Teddy, I think, is a great super flex option, and streaming in single quarterback leagues as bye week comes up here. He's been playing very well there, and Javonte Williams also getting some work, gets his first touchdown in the NFL there. So how do you feel about the Broncos and the Jets?
Yeah, I mean, I think really the key thing here is if you play a defense in your league, the Broncos defense so far has been fantastic for you, but take a step back and look at who they've played. They played a New York Giants team with, I forget Saquon's snap share, like 40% maybe, around there. So not a 100% full go Saquon Barkley. Then they played the Jags. Now they play the Jets. They still have to play the Chargers, the Chiefs, and the Raiders. Like, their upcoming schedule is not going to be what they've just had. I personally am not a pick up and play draft and play the same defense all year. If you are that type of person and you've been relying on the Broncos and expect to have this production season long, I'd start to look for other options.
I agree. And we'll see if the Broncos are the real deal. Again, I think they're going to give the Chiefs a run for their money. We'll see what happens there, but you're right. Their schedule has been very, very light so far. Another team that has been incredibly surprising, the Raiders, 3-0 so far, get another last-second win. They've had 2 overtime games in the first 3 here on the season. Padding the stats a little bit for Derek Carr and everybody else, but they do look good. Peyton Barber, 23 carries, 111 yards, and a touchdown. Absolutely insane. Hunter Renfrow, Ruggs, and Edwards all over 70 yards. Ruggs did get beat up in this game, but hopefully it's not long term. Derek Carr, 386 and 2 touchdowns. He should be rostered in all Superflex leagues. He obviously is. He's a weekly play in Superflex 2 quarterback leagues. He should also be rostered in single quarterback leagues coming up with bye weeks happening in the next couple of weeks. He's a streamable asset. Absolutely. For the Dolphins side, again, Mike Gesicki, 10 catches, 86 yards. He finally shows up. Myles Gaskin, still unusable. I faded him all off season, and people gave me a lot of shit for it. And so far, so good as far as I'm concerned on that one. Jacobi Brissett played a lot better than I thought he was going to. Showed a lot of grit late in the game. Got that last second rushing touchdown. Will Fuller played well, but of course he got injured in this game as well. Just a lot of question marks here, man. I'm still not totally sold on the Raiders, and I'm totally out on the Dolphins.
I would say for the most part, I'm out on the Dolphins. I mean, as an NFL team, I am, and especially while Brissett's behind center instead of Tua. But from a fantasy perspective, I think what's really interesting is that you saw Gesicki and Waddle be hyper targeted by Brissett in this game. Now, obviously, it's the Raiders' defense, and for the most part, it was the Dolphins were never ahead. I don't expect them to be moving forward with Brissett at quarterback. Next week they get the Colts, though. The Colts are a much better defense than the Raiders, and so the things to look for here is what does this Miami offense look like with Brissett against a better defense than the Raiders. And if he is continually targeting Gesicki and Waddle, and those are his two guys, I mean, Gesicki has to be a top tight end option if he's going to be hyper targeted like this, especially in a PPR format.
Yeah, we'll see if the Raiders are legit moving forward here. But look, got to give them credit, man. 3 wins is 3 wins in the NFL. Great start for Gruden and his gang. All right, let's go to 2 excellent games here in the late window. Bucks and Rams, 34-24. The Rams, I think you would call it an upset, but 2 NFC juggernauts. These guys are going to be competing, I'm sure, come January as well. But the Rams get the big win, 34-24. Matt Stafford, 343 and 4 touchdowns. Absolutely on fire so far. Cooper Kupp stays hot, 9 catches and 96 yards, another 2 touchdowns. I heard a nickname over the weekend that I absolutely love. Cooper Kupp, couple touchdowns, which I think would be a great team name there. Tom Brady, 432 of his own, just 1 passing touchdown. Also has that, QB sneak, Brady patented QB sneak from the 1. He gets a rushing touchdown as well. Tampa can't and doesn't run the football. Leonard Fournette was Bobby's start of the week last week. I wasn't feeling good about it. It didn't feel good against the Rams. Dud. Ronald Jones is a non-factor. Gio Bernard is only the quote-unquote James White in the final 2 drives of the game. I'm not excited to roster any of these guys. I don't think you can cut Leonard Fournette and Ronald Jones, but I would not be playing them automatically, certainly in negative matchups like going up against the Rams. On the other side, Sony Michel, great pass blocking, not a great running efficiency there. Nobody can run on either one of these teams, so I'm not really worried about the backfields, but I'm also not excited about them. Buccaneers get the Patriots. We'll talk about that in length like everybody else. Start Gronk, start Brady, start AB next week. It's going to be an onslaught on the Patriots. I think Brady's going to go nuts here in this one.
Yeah, I mean, and why wouldn't he? I mean, you talked about this offense not needing to run. They really don't. And that's why moving forward, Jones and Fournette honestly shouldn't really be on your radar. I mean, if they're on your teams, you're not going to be able to sell them. You mentioned I don't think you can drop them. Maybe you can hold them in case of an injury and throw Leonard Fournette in there. I mean, this week I had Ronald Jones in my work league, and before I made a trade for Tyson Williams, was starting Peyton Barber over Ronald Jones. Like that's how bad it has gotten for Ronald Jones. I mean, I don't think he's droppable, but you can't move him. You're kind of just stuck with him. But everyone else outside of the running backs for the Bucs offense are very obviously very viable. You know what the Rams offense is as well. The only one question mark is Robert Woods. I mean, this is not the involvement level that we really expected to see from Woods. I mean, every look is going to Cooper Kupp. But the question is there ever going to be a time where it's a Robert Woods game? I mean, we are only 3 games into the season, so we are working with a small sample size, and we have to remember that, and we have to think that some of these games moving forward are going to be a Robert Woods games, especially as defense start to key on Cooper Kupp more. But for right now, it just seems to be a Stafford Cooper Kupp show.
It is. I'm bringing up Robert Woods' stats here really quick here too. I want to read off his game log.
It's not great. It's like wide receiver 60, 61, 64, something like that.
Half PPR, he's had 11 fantasy points, 9.5 and 5.3. So he's trending the wrong direction. 4 targets, 9 targets, 6 targets, 3 catches, 5 catches, 33 catches. He scored a touchdown opening day. He has yet to since. He's not really getting the rushing attempts, just 1, 2, and 1, 27, 64, and 33 yards. Coming up for the Rams, Arizona, going to be a shootout. At Seattle, going to be a shootout. Giants, we'll see what happens there. At Houston, Tennessee, San Francisco, and then a bye. So the Rams are going to be just fine. But look, if Cooper Kupp's healthy, that's where it's going to go. And I think it unfortunately sheds a dark cloud over Robert Woods in that I didn't even bring him up in the game recap. This was a shootout. 58 points scored in this game, and I didn't even mention Robert Woods because unfortunately he is unmentionable. Him and Allen Robinson were my 2 guys in the middle rounds, man. 3rd, 4th round, PPR leagues. Those are my must draft players in those rounds. Neither one of them are even usable right now. Absolutely baffling. Let's get to our final game here, Jordan. Seahawks, Vikings. Vikings get the upset here, 30-17. As a Niner fan, this is a huge win for the Vikings because my Niners go down later that night. But during the day, I was like, yo, the Niners can get past the Packers. Now we got a game up on the Seahawks. Obviously, the Niners lose as well, but always good when your division mates lose. Also, big win here for the Vikings, though, coming off of 2 tough losses earlier. Kirk Cousins stays hot, 323 and 3 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson, 9 catches, 118 yards and a touchdown. Alexander Mattison fills in for Dalvin Cook, 160 total yards. He's had a couple duds over the years filling in for Dalvin Cook. This one was a massive blowout here, 160 total yards. DK Metcalf, 6 catches, 107 yards and a touchdown. Tyler Lockett got rolled up in this one on his ankle. He missed a couple snaps, came back, though, thankfully, so he should be just fine. Again, I thought there was going to be more fireworks in this game, but the Vikings get a huge one here, 30-17.
Yeah, I mean, we expected a little bit more from the Seahawks offense, I think. I mean, we expected it to be a shootout. Neither defense has been great so far. A quiet day from Chris Carson. Quiet day for the most part from Tyler Lockett. But I mean, if your fantasy guys are going up against the Seahawks defense, I mean, you got to start them. I mean, Kirk Cousins had a great day. Justin Jefferson had a great day. I mean, relatively a quiet day for Adam Thielen. But I mean, your backup running back, I mean, Madison's been great. He's been a handcuff for years to Dalvin Cook, but has never really been that guy when he's even had the chance. I mean, this week goes up against the Seahawks defense and puts up a ton of yardage, 112 on the ground a week after Derrick Henry, blew them out in the second half as well. I'm not saying that Madison's Derrick Henry, but my point is exactly that if your running back's going up against this Seahawks defense, as long as it's not like Mike Davis, I'd start him. Or Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette, of course. We just talked about that too.
Man, you remember Mike Davis? I'm old enough to remember when Mike Davis was the big pickup in the 5th or 6th round. Those were the days. All right, man, we have one question here that we didn't get to earlier that I wanted to hold to the end. So, Streak, I appreciate you holding tight, my man. Question for you, Jordan. We don't know the format, so we default to half PPR when that's the case. Trade question here from my man Streak on YouTube. Would you do Amari Cooper, Antonio Gibson, and Kyle Pitts for Travis Kelce and Kareem Hunt? Already has Mahomes, so looking for that chief stack. Again, would you trade away Amari Cooper, Antonio Gibson, and Kyle Pitts and receive Travis Kelce and Kareem Hunt if you already have Patrick Mahomes?
Yeah, in a half PPR or full PPR format, I'm going to take the Kelce Hunt side of this trade, especially with Mahomes. Like, obviously, that stack where you now have anytime that Kelce scores, it's coming from Mahomes unless Tyreek's throwing a trick play. But in a standard, I mean, it gets a little bit closer in that Gibson's not currently involved a lot in that Washington football pass offense, so hasn't been getting the targets, whereas Kareem Hunt obviously does. But I mean, I don't see the Pitts breakout really coming. We've had 3 weeks so far. We've mentioned and talked about how rookie tight ends don't ever really break out in their rookie seasons. And so if you can get Kelce, who's been, I think prior to this year, this past week was like the wide receiver 3 so far, and you get to play the wide receiver 3 in your tight end slot, Like I definitely take that and give up a hobbled Amari Cooper is currently being overtaken by CeeDee Lamb in that Dallas offense. Gibson, who hasn't been involved in the pass game in Washington, and Pitts, who hasn't broken out in Atlanta's offense when they're going to be passing a lot, being down so far.
I agree. I would take this trade here. I would take Hunt and Kelsey, but the reality is, if Amari gets right, if Gibson starts taking off, and if Pitts blows up, you're going to get crushed in this trade. So I want you to be realistic here on if you're like a 3-0 team or 2-1 and you have other guys and you're just looking for extra firepower with Kelsey and then hit or miss on Hunt, yes, I would do it. But if you're 0-2 or 0-3 or you're 1-2, I would hold strong with all these other weapons and cross your fingers here. With Mahomes, you're probably not winless, but just want to put that in perspective because Amari Cooper did blow up in week 1. Antonio Gibson could blow up moving forward. And Kyle Pitts, although it may not happen for a while, I do think it happens eventually. It's just a matter of time. He's getting the looks. The Falcons just aren't scoring touchdowns. Him and Ridley, if they score, we're having a totally different conversation here. So be patient on that. I would do it as of this week, but just know this one could backfire on you. So I think it depends on your season outlook as of right now. All right, Jordan, that's going to wrap up another lengthy one here. These episodes will calm down a little bit once we get to bye weeks and things. But as of right now, they are lengthy episodes because we have all games that we are bringing into. So I want to make sure everybody is please following us on all of our platforms. Again, please make sure to follow us on all the TCK pod platforms, the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast, on Believe Podcast Networks, anywhere you listen to your podcast. Please leave us a rate and review. I know every podcast says that. It really does help us not only get the word out, but it also gives us feedback. I read through every one of those comments, and I can't tell you the amount of feedback that we've gotten over the years of like better audio. So we increased audio. Let's get some guests on. We got some guests on. How about some co-hosts? Well, I gathered up some co-hosts. Now we bring you excellent content. I appreciate the feedback, or just give us a thumbs up, whatever. It really helps us out. Please do that wherever you're listening to your podcast. Also, make sure to follow us on the Fantasy Focus Football Facebook page, YouTube page, Twitter account, and also on Twitch. Give us a subscribe and a thumbs up there. Hit that bell so you can catch us every Sunday morning for the Start Sit Show. We will give you 3 hours of content here every Sunday, streaming live right here, 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern time. And of course, make sure you go hit up our sponsors, the Jersey Jungle. You heard at the beginning, all episodes of the Candlestick Kids Fantasy Football Podcast are brought to you by Bet Online, Play Action Pools, and of course, the rest of our sponsors with the Believe Podcast Network. Jordan, it's always a pleasure, man. Another lengthy one. Thank you for breaking down the Week 3 recap and looking ahead to Week 4. Bobby will be back with you with our man Bucks, and I'll be back with you with Chris Benavides later on in this week. Hope you're having a wonderful week. If you'd like to hear my tribute to Mike Tagliere, please dial it back a couple of episodes. We'll catch you next time. For my man, Jordan Della Valle, I am Sky Guasco. We will catch you next time. We are out of here.